All right, let's, as the last folks file in, let's begin today. I am Pete Starrett. I'm a senior partner and one of the chief product officers at Gray Associates. We are a software and services firm located, our folks are across the country. I'm just outside Boston. And we work exclusively in higher ed to provide really the systems and the services wrapped around those systems to help our clients make decisions relating to academic programs. I know we'll talk about budgeting a little bit in our session this afternoon, but really we hope that our data will aid you all plus your colleagues in making decisions across the institution. We know it's not going to drive those decisions. We truly believe in a data-informed approach to all of this, so you'll see a lot of numbers flashing up on the screen today. I'll try and zoom in on certain areas so that hopefully you can see it. But the intent is not to really drill down on any specific number today. It's really just to get a sense of what you can and can't do with our products, and some of this what you can do on your own if you're already calculating the economics of your programs, for example. So this first screen you see up here, again, I'm not going to focus a lot of time on, but this really summarizes all of the data that we're trying to bring to you all to help make those decisions, in particular, decisions relating to academic programs. So our system, as we call it, is a program evaluation system, and that includes multiple modules within it. One is focused on all of the external market data, and then the other is on all of your internal data, really. And this is what we've built that really brings it all together. We call this it's a provost dashboard to some degree, where it is bringing all of the market data, the economic data, the academic data into one sheet where you can rank any of these on an individual metric or column that you see across the top here. And really this is meant to help flag problem areas across the institution, right? Whether that be externally, where I mentioned we've got all this external data on Google searches, we've got job postings, a number of other different types of sources of data that you're probably more familiar with, like completions from iPads, BLS, labor statistics. We're pulling in data from a large number of sources, so that, again, this is typically on the academic side of the house, they can use that to determine which programs to start, stop, or grow. But then internally, we're pulling in information on things like enrollment, graduations. You'll see DFW rates, retention rates in here, again, to give you a sense internally of what those academic outcomes look like. And then what we'll really be focusing on today are the economics for the programs. And I'll get into what this looks like, but really here is where we're focusing on the total instructional cost, the contribution, which to us is the net revenue for the program minus that instructional cost, we refer to as contribution. And then lastly, some benchmark data, which I'll touch on briefly as well. So that gives you a sense of not just internally how programs compare to each other, but externally, how do your program costs per student credit hour compare to other institutions across the country that may be like you or may not be. So with that, I'll jump to our PES Plus Economics, as we call it, which is Program Evaluation System, economics. And here is where you can really drill down now into all of the internal data that you all have access to across the institution. I'm not going to get into a ton of detail in terms of how you can do these calculations. I will say we have a booth here, so we'd be happy to walk you through these. But I actually saw a session yesterday that I think it was Daryl, who maybe is here, and I'd love to chat. I see Daryl here, who walked through exactly how we think about it in terms of how you calculate the economics of your programs down to the sections, right? In terms of how you capture everything down at the student level. And he walked through that yesterday in one of the sessions. So, this is something you have the ability to do if you have really the right systems and the data is clean enough to actually do it, which I'd imagine it is across many of your institutions. So for those of you who are doing that today, I hope this provides you with some ideas on how you can present this data to your colleagues to help them make decisions, but also to give you the ability to share what you're seeing or to help with decisions you're trying to make by really showing the data that informs those decisions, as I was saying earlier. And really, it'll allow you to hopefully make those decisions a lot easier when you can show a dean what the economics look like for their department, right? And what that looks like for all of the individual courses based on how many students are enrolled in those courses, who's teaching it, what it costs to teach those faculty, and so on. So this is, and I'll zoom in and out throughout the session probably, but this is really the build as we see it in terms of what goes into the calculations. And again, just like we heard yesterday, we're focusing on the direct instructional economics. So we're capturing all of the gross revenue, which are tuition and fee charges to students. Then we're including discounts, which are strictly institutional discounts or scholarships or grants that is essentially coming out of this net revenue. And then for any public institutions in here, we include state appropriation dollars, which again, you'd want to try to get that formula right based on how that money is coming in and how you assign that to each individual student so that it sums up with their programs, which gives you your net revenue. And then for instructional costs, that's going to include all your full-time faculty salaries and benefits, any adjunct or part-time pay, plus benefits, plus any of the non-instructional costs, which I usually describe as, things like labs will have some additional non-personnel costs that you may include, in particular if those fees aren't just passed through. But that's another one of the costs that we include in instruction, which then we subtract from net revenue to give us our contribution. And again, just like we heard, this is all done down at the student credit hour level. So that allows you to sum it up however you'd like. I'll show you some tables in the system where, you can literally play around with how you aggregate the data, but it's really meant in doing it at such a granular level to allow not just you, but other users to come in here. And we mentioned looking at it by program a lot, but you'll see across the top several filters where if I wanted to look at it by college, I could. By department, I could. By an individual course subject, I could come in here. And course levels and so on, just by clicking on any of these and see what the economics for an individual course subject looks like. Because what it's doing is it's ultimately just summing up the economics for every student credit hour that is in that particular segment. So we're looking at, in this case, I've got a filter for 2021. This is not real data, by the way, but we're looking at data for 2021 and now the accounting course subject, and I can see for all of the students enrolled in those accounting courses in this particular year, what they were charged, what they were discounted, what we pulled in for the state appropriations, and what it costs to teach, giving us our total contribution. And this is, again, where having a system like this is really crucial to be able to actually use the data. Obviously, it's rare that we're working in spreadsheets today, but this does allow for users to come in and be able to visualize however they'd like to see it. And there are other, we could click on program, and there's other capabilities we've added to be able to see how these things compare to one another in the system as well. So I can grab accounting in the same year we're looking at, but now at the program level, and we've added the ability to compare programs internally. So to see based on totals how every program compares to one another using percentiles, which is something that we use pretty commonly to compare programs to one another. But when you're looking at totals, it's really just sizing up the volume, so we know accounting's a large program, but that's where having the ability throughout these systems, when you're doing comparisons, looking at things per student credit hour can be very helpful. That's how we do it when we look at external benchmarks, but even internally, it gives you a much better sense and a much more normalized way of looking at it to see how does my cost per student credit hour for accounting compare to our other programs. And we see it's in the 40th percentile, meaning it's only more expensive than 40% of the programs that this fake institution offers, but less expensive than 60% of those. And then finally, with all of this, we're showing here we've got trend data available as well. So I could flip back to totals to see that. And now we can see how this program's been trending overall. Obviously, the time period that you choose is completely and entirely up to you all and your institution, but as far as your data goes back is what you can see trends for. It's very easy. If you're doing the calculations for 1 year, it's typically not difficult to do for all years unless you've made some major system change that would affect that. But again, this really allows you to see for any of those particular drill downs what the trends look like across down to an individual section up to the university as a whole. From there, and this really kind of lays out all of the data that's in the system, it's really just how you then present it, right? So I mentioned we show the percentiles, but there's, we try to include multiple ways of being able to rank all the programs. So here is, and bear with me as the internet's not the best I've seen, but so it may take a second for some of these screens to load. But here is an example of where we can rank every program based on contribution from highest to lowest in any particular time period. And see there's from highest down to the lowest programs, what that looks like. See what programs are losing money. It should be rare that they are, depending on your type of institution. But that's because we're focusing strictly on the instructional costs, not the total institutional overheads. But you will still see sometimes programs that do lose money, so drilling down into those to understand why that is can be extremely helpful. And also then using those benchmarks to understand, is it fixable, or is that just something that we have to live with? But I will add, the goal of this is not entirely to just scroll to the bottom of the list and cut programs that lose money. And this, I think is, I'm sure you're all aware, but one of the more important things that we talk about when we do work with with institutions is we understand that there are programs that fit with your mission, right? So the goal is not to come in here and say that a program losing or making little money should be cut, right? If we're a religious institution offering theology, I don't expect to come in here and drill down on the economics and decide to stop that program. But really what we do need to find are those programs that are very profitable that will essentially subsidize those mission-focused programs. So that's another important thing to think about as you're going through and using all of this data is, and that's why we call it data-informed. There is still a great deal of judgment that has to go into looking at these numbers and thinking about how you use these numbers. And also thinking about how you communicate how you're going to use these numbers with your colleagues so that they also understand that, if you haven't engaged on doing these calculations, that the intent is not to just come in here and cut everything that looks small or negative. It's really to help with those decisions and understand where you can invest to grow, right? Where are those programs that have higher margins? And are there opportunities for us to grow? And that's where the market data can help play a role as well, though I'm not going to spend any time on it today, to help understand where maybe you're not performing as well in a particular program that may have high margins but still shows opportunities for growth. And then as I move across, so you'll see several sheets across the top here. Each one is really just meant to drill down on the data even more. So some of these are more charts again to visualize the data. And again, that's because we're working with many different types of users, all the way down from faculty up to the CFOs we have in the room today. So there are a lot of different ways we need to present it because, there's one of the sheets I'm going to show is probably much more geared toward folks in this room, but some people just like to see charts and tables and ranks. And that's to no fault of anyone's. It's just, sometimes a quick summary of what it looks like is very helpful. And this is one of those charts where, it can be a quick summary, but you can play and drill down with it quite a bit. This here is showing what we saw in the rank in that we're looking at programs contribution over on the left, and then we've got student credit hours on the x-axis. So what we're seeing is that, first off, as I said, most programs make money. They're mostly above the line. But one of the keys is that, and this is where looking at the economics is important, in particular for program decisions, and that cutting based on size is not the right answer either. So you need to think about mission, but you also need to include these economics because if I were to just drill down on this chart, we can see that, while it is true that more programs on the left were losing money, those smaller programs, there's no, reason that a small program has to lose money. we can see here there are several dots that are smaller than some of these red ones, but are still positive, albeit they are relatively small. But there can be many reasons why you may still have these programs that are worth continuing. Mission's one, but how many students are enrolled in the courses that program may be required to teach can also be another set of numbers that you can look at when you drill down on the courses. Which does bring me to my next point, if I zoom back out again, that as I mentioned, it's not programs that lose money, it's really underneath that and where you can find those efficiencies. And this is where a lot of our work is moving into today, is I wouldn't call it cost cutting, but a lot of institutions realize that they're offering, and we'll talk about this, I have a session later this morning with one of our clients at Tiffin University who use this data to help find those efficiencies within the courses underneath their programs. So they're making program decisions to start in terms of finding growth opportunities, finding opportunities they may need to sunset. But then within those, even those successful programs, he found several courses that they were able, or I should say sections, really underneath courses that they're just running too small. So there's no reason to offer a section with 2 sections with 5 students when he could have offered one with 10. Is one example. That's a pretty basic example, but that's really where having this data at your fingertips can help, drill down on those particular answers. So I could literally come in here and zoom in again on the left and just keep focusing in on those smaller courses essentially to see, where are these ones that are small and losing money just by, making filters on the data, but then jumping to see if I go to the data table now. And this is where I spend most of my time when I'm doing my work, and this is really as it sounds. It's like you would look at it in Excel, where you can build out a table to view the details underneath any of the selections you've made, or aggregate it all the way up through the institution. And here you'll see once it loads that it is showing a table, albeit small, where we're looking at it based on all those courses I grabbed on the prior chart. So we're looking at all those courses that were losing money. I can see how that looks by department, right? So I can see how many students were in those engineering courses for the engineering department, how many student credit hours there were, and what the instructional cost per SCH was. And if I go and choose this toggle, I can see that what the average instructional cost per SCH is across the entire institution in a particular year as well. This is going to be reflective of the selections that we've made, but so we can see that, for all these negative courses, the average instructional cost is $619. If I were to go back and remove that selection for the selected courses, we can see that once this loads again, what the average looks like for the institution as a whole, and we're at about $115, right? So right away we know that the courses we were just looking at least per student credit hour, cost quite a bit more than the average section does across demo university here. So that's, again, providing some of these high-level KPIs to help show where there may be problem areas underneath the data or underneath the departments, I should say. And really one of the neat things and why I say I love tables like this is, to me it is built for all types of use cases because there are buttons all around the page to toggle between different metrics and different dimensions. So we're looking at course departments right now. I could very easily come in here and add the codes so that you, again, would be able to see it now for each individual course. And we can now see, once this populates, what our highest instructional cost per student credit hour is for an individual course, right? From highest, where we've got one student that we taught in this particular course for whatever reason, and we were paying $6,800, again, not real, but for this individual class, that would be something of, did we have to teach that section, right? If the answer is yes, then you can start working your way up through that individual department or program, whatever that aligns with. So it really does give you the ability to, I mentioned at the beginning, aggregate it however you'd like, where you can play around with all of the different program attributes, all the course attributes, even the student attributes, to visualize the data in different ways. I mean, even the student attributes, I know, I mean, the DEI is a very hot topic in the world today. And I mean, because all of this data is typically coming from the same place where you capture student demographics, where you capture even instructor demographics, it does allow you to include a lot more than just the financials when you're assessing courses, departments, or programs at the institution. So from there is really just, I mean, I think this is the most detail you can really get into in the system in terms of building out these tables. After that is really just there's some additional information. I mentioned benchmarking. I didn't want to touch on it early, but you know, everything up to this point is really giving you the ability to see the economics of your historical data and what that looks like. These next couple of tabs, and I meant internal historical data, these next couple of tabs I'll show give you the ability to compare externally and then to think about looking ahead what, you know, certain scenarios may look like. So the first I'll touch on is benchmarking. This, I mean, should be pretty obvious of what it is doing, but this is just one example I'll show of a chart where it'll give, again, users the ability to see how our courses or programs are doing compared to other institutions, right? Always one of the problems with the percentiles I shared earlier that we hear is, you know, the costs for our sciences aren't nearly the same as what it may look like for English, right? So comparing those doesn't truly make a ton of sense, but this then gives you the ability in having external benchmarks to really compare apples to apples so that we can see that while music, so this bar is showing our cost per student credit hour for our music courses. So we can see that it's the second highest cost per student credit hour for us, but then we're able to see how does that compare to other institutions that also offer music. And so that's where these lines that hopefully you can see represent the 25th, the 50th, and the 75th percentile of courses within music in our benchmark sample. So that, again, it gives, you know, you all, and really it gives faculty and deans the ability to see how they're doing in terms of how efficient their departments are being run, right? Because while, you know, there may be pushback, especially, you know, we hear this all the time today, right? You know, we need to cut budgets. That can be hard to do when you look at something like this and you're already running pretty tight. So having the ability to see, you know, how do we compare to other institutions? You know, are we running below the median in terms of how our courses look compared to those same courses at other institutions in, you know, we could go and grab our sector specifically, schools our size, by the individual course levels. I could go and look at our 100 levels and see how do those compare to other institutions as well. So that, I mean, and music always comes up towards the top, by the way. I'm sure those of you who have music and do this have noticed that. But again, how do our music 100s compare to other institutions in terms of their instructional costs? We can look at net revenue and contribution as well, but obviously that's dictated a little by who the students are enrolled in those particular classes and what they ultimately paid, which I know scholarships play a huge role in the variations in that. But again, this gives you really the ability to compare across institutions. And then the last thing I wanted to really share kind of on the forward-looking part is just having the ability to sort of project out what, you know, changes to program sizes is one of the examples we use might look like in terms of the overall economics. Because of the internet, there's no way I could run live examples today, but I have one loaded here where I'm cutting one of the programs that this school offers. So in this case, it had 29 students, and overall, you can see what doing that would look like. And so we can see that if we truly lost all of those students, we'd lose 230,000 a year. But we'd only save 82,000 based on the sections that we're able to eliminate for that program. And so what this is really showing you the summary of a model that we've built on top of all this data to come in and make changes to program sizes. So for example, someone could come in here and put, what are our targets for next fall for every individual program, and see what that looks like, which will show you overall how the economics might change, but gets down to the individual detail within the departments and the courses themselves to indicate where, if this program were to grow, would we need to add instructors to that department based on what our new section sizes might look like? If we were to cut it, how many sections could we eliminate from that program? Because what it's doing is it's looking historically at what courses students from programs typically enroll in, and then projecting out based on those changes and based on students moving ahead one level, what that looks like down at the individual course level. So that, again, it will help, hopefully, with budgeting in terms of, if we are to hit these targets this upcoming year, what may we need to add to a department so that we aren't, our faculty aren't swamped? What, could we potentially, start looking at in terms of cutting, and that, we may not be able to fill sections in a particular subject area. So it really, this kind of gives you the ability to come in here and see based on, this one change that I made, but obviously you can input any changes. What that looks like in terms of enrollment changes is what I'm sorted on right now by individual course, and therefore how many sections we can see that we may be able to cut because of how many of the students that we're losing in that particular discipline. So I know this was, I only have a half hour, and this was a jam-packed session, but that really summarizes sort of the program level economics and the drill downs to the courses. The one last thing I do want to mention that we have included, well, two more things in the last 2 minutes here is, again, there's, I did mention that this focuses on the direct instructional economics. But we do also pull in, we can pull in overheads and see obviously what all the different orgs look like in terms of costs. But one of the other areas we do focus on is in doing, these assignments of costs for faculty to their sections, they do a lot of other things than just teach. So one of the other areas that we believe is still important to look at, and I think is helpful for the academic folks as well, is what else are we spending money on within those academic departments? And this is where an example where, we're showing here percentages, but we can see the total dollars as well. But to see, what's our full-time versus adjunct split, but also what are we spending within those academic departments in terms of release costs, and then, as we call it, those unallocated costs, right, where somebody didn't teach a full load but was supposed to. Maybe, a section was dropped because it was under-enrolled and they didn't pick one up. So having the ability to also look by department to see, or division, whatever it's called at your institution, to see where we spent 20% of our total dollars in engineering on releases. Again, not real, but was that intentional? Is that some artifact of what somebody was doing in the past? And we can always filter this on total dollars as well to see what does that equate to in terms of total dollars being spent, which is $800K in this, $880K in this example. So it does give you the ability to see more than just the sort of that lower level programs or courses, but also how does that, how do the departments look as a whole, and what are those other things that we're paying for and obviously budgeting for, and how is that time being spent? And we've done this with clients where they've been surprised with how high some of these dollars were. Because they weren't aware that we were spending this much outside of just teaching. But again, this will vary quite a bit depending on type of institution, research, non-research, and so on. And then the last thing was just for those users who aren't familiar with these types of systems, we have just recently added the ability to ask questions as well, so that folks can come in here and say, ask who may not know how to use the system. To us, this was meant to help with, maybe a faculty user who's not in the data every day. They could come in here and literally type a question, show me contribution, and you can click on all the by age by program. This is a question that somebody asked it before. And what it'll do is now the system literally thinks and will produce charts. It'll take a minute again with the Wi-Fi. But this is really where I wanted to end it, because this now gives users the ability who aren't familiar with the systems to come in here and say, you know, what is my revenue for the business department? How many students enrolled in courses in the accounting program? So that they don't need to necessarily know how to use the system. They can come in and ask questions, and now with the technology where it is today, can just produce a chart and answer it for them. And they're all editable, where they could come in here and, you know, users can play with these charts and make edits to the dimensions or the metrics, and, you know, it'll produce the results that they truly want to see, not just some of the things we've created for them. So that's really a million things I just shared with you today on one of the products, but I hope you found this helpful. I didn't really leave a ton of time for questions. I know we're past our time today, but I did, as I mentioned, we have a booth upstairs where where lunch and breakfast are, so I'd be happy to answer any more questions or schedule more time if this is something that'd be of interest to you, or even just, I mean, we love telling or sharing with folks how they can do this themselves as well. Because again, you have all the data. It's really just, you know, you need the right people to work on it and the right system or software to build it. So, thank you. Feel free to come up here too. I have a break, so if you have a question, just come on up and let me know.